ever try to save somebody who didn't want to be saved? I mean, really try? Drag them out of their own mess. Lose sleep over their choices. Pour every last drop of yourself into somebody else's problem and watch them go right back and make the same mistake the very next day? I read a book by a woman named Mel Robbins called The Let Them Theory. And one line near the front of that book stopped me cold. She said, "The more you try to rescue someone, the more they sink." Not because you're doing it wrong, but because rescuing someone takes away the one thing they actually need, the chance to rescue themselves. That idea made me think of a story. It goes back to a little silver mining town called Driftwood Creek, out in the territories, back when the nights were dark, and the nearest help was 3 days' ride through country that didn't care whether you made it. And in that town, there was a doctor named Lillian Cross. Lillian was 34, the only doctor in 50 miles. She'd come west after the war, packed a leather bag and a stubbornness that could outlast a mule in August. Set up her clinic in an old feed store, scrubbed the floors herself, and hung a sign outside that just said, "Doctor," because around here, that was enough. And Lord, did they need one. She stitched up knife wounds on Saturday nights and delivered babies on Sunday mornings. She was good. The kind of good that made people feel like, as long as Dr. Cross is here, nothing too bad can happen. But Lillian had a problem no medical training could fix. She didn't just treat the people of Driftwood Creek. She tried to save them from everything, including themselves. There was Edgar Fenn, miner, mid-40s, built like a barrel with legs. Every Friday, he drank his wages at the saloon. Every Saturday morning, cracked ribs, split lip, some new creative injury from the stumble home. Lillian patched him up every week, looked him dead in the eye and said, "Edgar, the drinking is going to kill you." And every week, Edgar would nod real solemn-like, put his hat on, and walk straight back to the saloon. There was the widow Harrigan, quiet woman, sad eyes, living under the roof of a man whose temper was the worst-kept secret in town. Lillian begged her to leave, found her a room above the general store, wrote letters east, even confronted the man directly, and got a slammed door and a threat for her trouble. The widow stayed every single time. And there was Tommy Bright, 19 years old, grin that could charm the boots off a rattlesnake, absolutely determined to lose every coin he earned at the card table. Lillian loaned him money twice, drew him a household budget on the back of a prescription pad. Tommy smiled, tipped his hat, and lost it all by Tuesday. Lillian was exhausted. And I don't mean tired from the doctoring. She could handle the doctoring. It was the carrying, the lying awake at night with Edgar's liver on her mind, the knot in her stomach every time she saw the widow walking stiffly down the street, the frustration of watching Tommy throw his future away, hand after hand after hand. She was hauling the whole town on her back, and the town didn't seem to notice or care. Then one October night, everything broke at once. Edgar collapsed face first in the mud on the main street. Lillian ran from her clinic, kneeled down in the cold dark, and she knew his liver was done. Years of whiskey had finally called in the debt. And while she was trying to stabilize him, someone came running from the other direction. The widow Harrigan, hurt badly this time. And while Lillian was trying to figure out how to be in two places at once, a boy sprinted up the street to say Tommy Bright owed serious money to serious men, and they were coming to collect before sunrise. 3 emergencies, 1 doctor, one pair of hands. She ran for 7 hours straight, barked orders at the barkeep to carry Edgar inside, ran to the widow's house, pushed past Cyrus, tended to her injuries, sent the boy to find the sheriff, ran back to Edgar, then back to the widow, then to the sheriff's office, where she found him, predictably, drunk. By sunrise, she had nothing to show for it. Edgar woke up furious that the town had seen him carried out of the street. He didn't come back for 3 weeks. The widow, bandaged and shaking, went right back inside with Cyrus. And Tommy? He skipped town in the night, owing money to men who don't forget debts, heading God knows where. Lillian sat on the steps of her clinic as the sun came up, covered in mud, someone else's blood on her sleeves, hands shaking. She hadn't saved a single one of them, and she had nearly destroyed herself trying. That was the morning Samuel sat down next to her. Samuel was a carpenter, quiet man. He'd been building shelves for her clinic without being asked, fixing her roof after rainstorms, leaving firewood at her door on cold mornings. She'd barely noticed, too busy saving everybody else. He sat there for a long while without saying anything. Then, real quiet, he said, "Lillian, you can't hold a town together with your bare hands. Some folks have got to hold themselves." She wanted to argue. She was too tired to argue. So she just asked, "Then what am I supposed to do?" And Samuel said, "Let them." Now, he didn't know Mel Robbins. He didn't know her research, or the neuroscientist she interviewed, or the psychological term for what he was describing. But here is what Robbins explains in the let them theory, and I want you to hear this. Every human being has a hardwired biological need for control. When you pressure someone, even with love, even with the best intentions in the world, their brain registers it as a threat, and they push back. Not because they're ungrateful, because you are fighting against the wiring of their mind. The harder you pull, the harder they resist. Lillian had been pulling on everyone in town for years and losing every time. But here's the part Samuel didn't say, the part Lillian had to figure out on her own. Because Robbins is very clear about this. If all you ever do is say, "Let them," and walk away, you end up alone. You end up bitter. You end up watching the town fall apart and telling yourself it's not your problem. Let them, without what she calls "let me," is just giving up with a nicer name. The power is in the second part. Let me decide what's worth my energy. Let me focus on what I can actually control. Let me choose how I show up, not out of guilt or fear, but because it's who I want to be. That changed everything. It didn't happen overnight. These things never do. She stopped lecturing Edgar when he walked through her door. She gave him the information, clearly and once, and let him walk out and do whatever he was going to do. It felt, at first, like watching someone drown and choosing not to jump in. But 6 weeks later, Edgar walked into her clinic and he wasn't bleeding. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, and said, "Doc, I think I might need some help with the drinking." She almost fell off her stool. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't lecture. She said, "Okay, Edgar, let's figure it out." He'd hit his own bottom. Not because Lillian pushed him there, because she finally stopped catching him before he landed. With the widow, it was slower. But Mel Robbins talks about something she calls frame of reference. The idea that you can't understand someone's choices until you try to see the world through their eyes. Not to agree, not to excuse it, but to understand why they're doing what they're doing, even when it looks insane from the outside. When Lillian finally tried, she saw it. The widow wasn't staying because she was weak. She was staying because Cyrus controlled the deed, the money, and the only connection she had left to her dead husband's memory. Leaving wasn't just leaving a bad man. It was leaving everything she had left of the man she'd loved. So Lillian stopped pushing, stopped showing up with plans the widow hadn't asked for, just kept the door to her clinic open, made it clear, without pressure, without guilt, that whenever she was ready, there was a place to go. 7 months later, on a cold February morning, the widow Harrigan walked into the clinic with a suitcase. She didn't explain. Lillian just said, "The room above the general store is still available. I checked last week." The widow looked at her. "You've been checking?" "Every week." That's the let me. You don't stop caring. You don't stop preparing. You just stop forcing. And when the moment comes, when they're finally ready, you are there. Not as a rescuer, as a door that was always open.
Now here's where I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with this. Who are you carrying right now that you need to put down? Not because you don't love them, not because they don't matter, but because the weight of trying to run somebody else's life is crushing the life right out of yours. Who have you been rescuing at home, at work, in your family, who actually needs the chance to rescue themselves? I'll tell you where Lillian ends up. 2 years later, Driftwood Creek was a different town. Not because she fixed it, because she stopped trying to. Edgar had been sober 14 months. He was learning woodworking from Samuel. Turns out, a man who used to break things is awfully good at making them once his hands stop shaking. The widow ran the general store now, bought it outright. Best stock store in 3 counties by all accounts. And Tommy Bright? One spring afternoon, a young man rode into town on a tired horse, thinner, older in the eyes. He walked into the clinic and stood in the doorway. "Hey, Doc." "Tommy?" He was quiet a moment. Then, "I think I'm ready to come back, if you'll still have me." Lillian didn't lecture, didn't list 100 things she'd wanted to say for 2 years. She just said, "There's a chair. Sit down." And he did.
Mel Robbins wrote the let them theory for every person who's been pouring from an empty cup. Every fixer, every rescuer, every person lying awake at 3 a.m. carrying someone else's weight in their chest. And what she found, after 2 years of research and every conversation she could have, is this. When you stop trying to control the people you love, something remarkable happens. They often come to the right decision on their own. Not because you forced them, because you finally let them. And the more you let other people live their lives, the more you actually get to live yours. Lillian wasn't exhausted anymore. She had time. Time for her clinic. Time to notice the man who'd been quietly showing up for her all along, Samuel, who she married the following spring in a ceremony so small and so right, it was exactly what it needed to be. She was still the only doctor in 50 miles. She still stitched up the Saturday night wounds. But she did it differently now. She offered her skill, her care, her knowledge, and she let the rest go. That's the let them theory. Not giving up, just finally understanding. The only life you can truly save is your own. And when you do, you make room for everyone else to save theirs. If this story found you at the right moment, I'd be grateful if you'd hit subscribe. I've got a whole pile more stories where this one came from, and I'd sure love your company. And if you know somebody who's been holding everybody else together at the cost of themselves, send them this one. Sometimes the right story does more good than any advice you could give. I'll see you in the next one.